Last lesson we looked at, or I introduced the idea of figurative language. Hopefully many of you have already experienced this in previous English courses, so I'm hoping this is a reminder, but for some of you it may be new information, or some of you may have just forgotten the information. So on the screen you'll see the 5 types of figurative language or language devices I mentioned last lesson. I'm not going to go over them again. They were discussed last lesson, and you can see the definitions on the side anyway. There are more than these 5, as I said on Wednesday, but if you can at least attempt to use these, your writing will be interesting to read. These should be used to enhance your writing. As I said, there are a lot of others, and we, over the course of the year, will experience the others as well, but we're going to start with these fairly simplified. To use to aid description, which is what we've been working on in the last few lessons. So these are just another tool to use to make interesting writing. As I said on Tuesday, for those of you who are here, or for those of you who can't, those of you who were there, and for those of you who may not be able to remember, it's not necessary to try to use them every time you write a sentence, but try to litter them throughout your piece, but maybe one each in each paragraph. The teacher with you today should have given you these 2 sheets. They may have given you 3, including the writing with precise vocabulary, but we're going to look at these 2 first together. Now, the interesting thing with these sheets is I often look at them and think, oh, they're pretty easy, but I have given them to year 12s in the past and they've found them quite difficult. So I'll be interested to see how you go with them. Now, down the bottom, you'll see, down the bottom here, is the choices that you have to fit to each of the sentences. Okay, so there is no original simile that you need to develop. You just need to choose the one that best fits from the answer box. There is only one correct answer. So and once you've used one, you obviously can't use it anywhere else. So you'll need to think really carefully. Read the introduction, because it does give you some clues, but also read each sentence carefully and look to see how the simile matches what the sentence is discussing. You may also need to do a little bit of research to check some words. So for example, you may need to find out exactly what a siphon is. This is this word here. Okay, I think, or this word here, which is seed catalogues. You may need to find out what seed catalogues actually are. Okay, I think everything else, is fairly self-explanatory. Notice it does say you can work in pairs, so that's fine. But work closely, do research, don't just throw random phrases at the sentences and hope they're going to fit, because I'm going to be collecting these at the end of the lesson and seeing how correct you were. I think I will award some sort of type of prize for the most correct answers. Once you've done the simile worksheet, I want you to move over to the metaphor sheet. It's the same principle as the simile sheet. You have read the information at the top, okay, and then read the sentences. It would be a good idea to read all of the sentences before you choose the answer box, because that will definitely help. Once again though, the answers that you choose from are down the bottom. You can only choose from these. Okay. Filling stations, I guess, is like a petrol station, so don't get too concerned about that. Everything else you should be able to understand. If you don't, So for example, upholstered, you may need to do a little bit of research. Once again, working in pairs, which is fine. Same thing again, the relief teacher is going to collect these and I will give a small prize for the pair that has the most correct answers. And there will also be a prize for the combination, so of a pair that has the most correct answers across both sheets. Prize will be small, but it will be sweet and sugary and will make you feel good after eating it. Okay, moving on. So once you've done that, we want to move on to precise vocabulary. Now, I'm not sure if I actually gave this poem to the relief teacher, okay? But if I haven't, you can read it here. Yes, it's another poem. I know how much you love poetry, but hopefully the poem that I showed you on at the end of last lesson has maybe made some of you rethink poetry. But I want you to look at this poem. I'm not really interested in it as a poem. What I'm really interested in it for is because what it's saying. You'll notice here where it talks about words. And it talks about how we should be specific when we write. So here it gives us an example of a noun, the noun being a bird. A bird is, yes, it's a creature that flies, and if I say I saw a bird, you'll have some image of some type of bird flying in the sky. However, it'll be whatever bird you choose to put in your imagination or in your mind. It won't necessarily be the bird I meant. Now, if we look at the birds that we can choose from, in this case, the poet has chosen a swallow, a great horned owl, a hawk, or oriole. All types of birds, but those images are very different. For example, the image of a hawk, rather than just a bird, is much more aggressive. It's an aggressive bird, it's a hunting bird, so it gives a much different image in our mind compared to a swallow. Okay, the same with a horned owl. Okay, which owls have an association with wisdom. So in our mind, we might have a very different idea of what the speaker or writer is saying if they talk about a horned owl. Same thing as if you said seagull. Okay, so there they're talking about nouns, and in this verse or stanza is actually the correct word. They talk about she, the poet Maury Applegate, talks about the word flew, writes about the word flew. Okay, as what we call a generic verb. Right? So a verb that, yes, we know the creature flew, but look at the other words that the poet has used. Darted, circled, swooped, lilted. Look how much more interesting those words are and the type of image that we associate now with this bird. It's not just this random bird that's perhaps hovering in the sky. It's doing something, but it's doing something very specifically. I don't need to go on to all of them, but if you read all the stanzas, you'll see how the poet talks about moving from these generic, common, not very specific verbs, adjectives, and nouns to something much more precise and giving us a much more precise image. Once you've read the poem, the relief teacher will give you this activity, which is a vocabulary exercise where you're going to look at these words that perhaps you've never heard of before. And you're going to match them to these words down the bottom, which are fairly common and self-explanatory, but certainly the words here are rarely used by students. Now, I guarantee if you are to use these words in your writing. Obviously not all of them. I'm not expecting to see 36 of these words in your writing all of a sudden. But some of them, you're certainly going to have a piece that's not only more interesting to read, where you've used the figurative language and you've used the sensory description. You're also going to show that you're a sophisticated writer because your knowledge of vocabulary is better than an average student. So the exercise here is obviously to match these words, okay? So they are adjectives to the ones down the bottom. So for example, luminous means very. Let's have a look what we have to choose from. Bright's a good choice, and that is the one that fits. So I've done the first one for you. Okay, so now this is an individual activity because I want you to, now you can obviously discuss with your neighbour, that's fine, but everyone hands up their own. Same thing again, definitely a prize for the person who gets the most correct answers. And once that's done, you're going to give it to the relief teacher and they're going to give it to me. Then you're going to move on to your piece of writing. And you're going to look back at that piece you wrote in the first lesson and you did some work on last lesson. You're going to look at your vocabulary. So look at your nouns, your adjectives, your verbs, refer to that poem and see the other things that she writes about, adverbs and such, and look to improve your use of those. A clue, as I said on Wednesday, this word, which I personally hate, well, maybe not hate, it's a strong word, really get disenchanted when students use it because basically it means they just couldn't be bothered actually describing exactly what the character did. Same with this one. Okay, there are so many words in the English language. Some people estimate there are over 1 million words, and most of the time students, all they can describe it when a character goes somewhere is all they can say to me is they went. You know, there are probably 100 words you could choose that would be a lot more interesting. Okay, and that should get you to the end of the lesson. When at the end of the lesson, oh sorry, no it shouldn't. And I also want you to attempt to use figurative language in your piece. Even if you only start the introduction part that we worked on Wednesday, or the setting part, even if you only work in that area, in that paragraph, that's fine, but attempt to use it. So as the next few lessons progress, I'm going to be asking people to read parts of their assignments to hear how you've used these techniques and how you've improved your vocabulary. That should get you to the end of the lesson. And obviously at the end of the lesson, save your work. You don't need to send it to me on this occasion because I'm going to be looking at it next lesson. And we'll have lots of exciting things to do then as well.